So you're a PT or PTA grad who's feeling the spark of something more. Maybe you dream of building your own business, one that's constructed around your vision, one that empowers you to make a real difference on your terms. This feeling, it's the entrepreneurial itch, and you're not alone. Countless PTs and PTAs are taking the leap to entrepreneurship, crafting careers that are as unique as they are. Welcome to the Innovate and Rehabilitate, the Entrepreneurial PT Podcast. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the world of PTpreneurship with inspiring physical therapists and physical therapist assistants just like you who are crushing it on their terms. We'll uncover their secrets, their struggles, and the incredible impact they're making. From building your PT boss dreams to navigating the business side of things, we'll equip you with the knowledge and inspiration to turn your vision into reality. So, whether you're just curious about starting your own business or you're already out there making your dreams a reality, this podcast is for you. Get ready to unleash your inner entrepreneur. Let's do this.
Hello and welcome. I'm Scott Giles, founder of Score Builders. I'll be your host for this podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Tom Walters, best-selling author, board-certified orthopedic physical therapist, and founder of Rehab Science. With a deep passion for human movement, pain science, and injury recovery, Tom has helped millions of people understand their bodies and heal more effectively. His book, Rehab Science, How to Overcome Pain and Heal from Injury, is currently the #1 physical therapy book on Amazon. He's also a social media sensation with over 2.5 million followers on Instagram and YouTube, where he shares practical evidence-based insights into rehab and recovery. Tom earned his bachelor's in exercise science from Montana State University and a doctor of physical therapy from Chapman University. He's taught kinesiology and pain science at Westmont College and even treated elite performers as a physical therapist with Cirque du Soleil. Now based in Santa Barbara, California, Tom balances clinical practice with family life alongside his wife, Kirsten, and their 2 daughters. Let's dive into this incredible journey and the science behind healing. Tom, thanks a lot for joining us today. I appreciate it. I know you're a very busy guy.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me. I was just saying that back in my days at Chapman University at the PT program, towards the end there, I used your book. We all used your book to study for the board. So such a full circle moment. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, totally. And actually, we literally just talked about this a minute ago before we went live, but we also realized that it was very possible that I may have been the course instructor for a 2-day course way back in the day with Tom at Chapman, a school that I've taught at many times. So yeah, so this is fantastic. So you never know. You're sitting in that classroom as a student, just, hoping to get through this exam. And the next thing you know, you're, this PT icon with 2.5 million followers on social media, and you're offering great advice. And hey, a couple of weeks ago, by the way, picked up the book. Very
awesome,
nice. And I've actually used it and implemented 2 exercises for a little back issue I've got going on already. So we'll get into the book and things like that later. But no, it's fantastic.
That's amazing.
All right, so Tom, how did this, let's go way back. How did you, you graduated from Chapman, you got into clinical practice. Let's talk about your early years.
Yeah, I was an athlete growing up in high school, mostly a martial artist and a gymnast. So I always had really a deep fascination for exercise science and just the movement system. I didn't really have that language to describe it back then. I was like a lot of high school boys. I just was trying to get bigger muscles. So I was reading all the muscle and fitness. Yeah, exactly. I was reading muscle and fitness and just, but there was no anatomy and physiology in high school curriculums at that time. So I really actually didn't enjoy school and thought I would just open a martial arts school. And now reflecting back on it, I think what I really loved was teaching. I was a black belt. I taught Taekwondo. I think education is the through line in my whole career. And it took me a long time to figure that out. But I really enjoyed teaching martial arts, thought I would open a martial arts school, and then just decided I'll give college a 1-year try and just see where it goes. And then I found anatomy and physiology, and my wife will notice this. I can be very obsessive about something when I get into it. And then once I found anatomy and physiology in this area of study, I really geeked out on it. And I fell in love with it. And I think the combination of those years as an athlete, I'd had knee surgery in high school, so I had experience with PT and orthopedic surgery and things. And so that love of kind of exercise and then learning about anatomy and physiology, physical therapy was kind of felt like the best route for me. I looked at a lot of different options from medical school, podiatry. I did an optometry internship. I looked at a lot of things. And It was really, I think it felt like the best fit for me. And when I was in physical therapy school, I was most pulled towards orthopedics. I really enjoyed biomechanics and kind of that real kinesiology, kind of looking at the anatomy, how it influences movement, kind of the mechanical part of it. So that's where my early career was in a regular insurance-based orthopedic practice, and I only lasted just shy of 2 years in that before realizing that that model is so hard. Anyone working in the insurance model knows it's just you're seeing so many patients. It just the burnout rates are so high, and I just knew I wasn't going to last there for very long. So then I kind of went on this whole journey of exploring, jumping around to different things. The Cirque du Soleil thing. I did traveling physical therapy for a year. My wife's a physical therapist, so we went together
Oh,
and did
nice.
that. And then I found education, and that teaching at Westmont College, I taught there for 10 years in their kinesiology department, and I realized then that education is the thing I'm most passionate about and the thing I love. And so now that's really my filter for anything I say yes to is, does it have that education kind of foundation to it? And I really think of all of my social media content. Really, I think of myself as an educator. I would never call myself an influencer or content creator. It feels a little weird. I think at my base level, I'm an educator. And so it's been amazing to be on those platforms and see them grow.
Yeah, that's incredible, and we'll definitely get into that for sure. So, okay, so then you joined when you were at Westmont. You're a full-time faculty member teaching kinesiology, and
Yep.
did you still have your hand in physical therapy directly at that time? And tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a sort of like a side cash practice. So I had left insurance and I kind of kept that the whole time. Once I came back to town after our traveling physical therapy stint and the Cirque du Soleil thing, once we came back to Santa Barbara, I opened pretty much a cash practice. And so while I was teaching there, yeah, with a teaching schedule, I didn't, I just, with a university schedule, with a teaching schedule, it's not really what we would think of as like full time in terms of what you'd think of in the clinic. So I'd have gaps between classes, or some days I'd only have one class. So then I would go down to this clinic and see patients there. So yeah, it was just kind of balancing the two. It was so great because I've realized over the years that seeing a few patients, and I see a lot less now, but seeing people does remind me of the common clinical questions that patients have and the common problems. And that really informs the educational content that I create. So there is the two feed off each other. And so I even today, I try to keep some of my hands and mind in the clinical world just because it really does help that educational side.
Well, certainly. I mean, yeah, it's great to work on both sides of those pieces, but you've certainly your educational process, your teaching chops, those things clearly, you got to put on heavy when you were at Westmont, which is great. And then you did the other. Now, I'm just trying to think, what kind of time frame are we talking about when you kind of were at Westmont to when you started working in the cash-based clinic? Because, address that first. How long ago was
Yeah.
that? Just ballpark.
Yeah. Yeah. So I finished Chapman in 2007. I started practicing in that insurance based practice until about almost 2009. And then I was gone. So Kirsten and I came back to Santa Barbara in, I want to say it was early 2011, because our first daughter was born in June of 2011. So we were back and I was seeing patients. And then the fall of 2012 is when I started at Westmont College teaching. So pretty much as soon as I started teaching that fall of 2012, I also opened a cash practice.
That you are an early adopter of that. I mean, for the most part, right? I mean, obviously there's some regionality associated with this, but certainly the cash-based practice now, maybe the last 5 years, has really exploded. But you were very early in that. Tell us about that. Was it an existing structure that was a clinic where you could go in and you just see patients and you'd have to just pay a certain amount of what you saw, some fee per patient to see, or was this something you were doing totally under your own umbrella? It was your deal. There was no one else involved.
Yeah, it was totally under my own umbrella. So it is
Wow.
interesting to think about back in terms, like you say, a lot of people are think about cash practice now, but I guess I probably was early on back then. And I think really what happened was that I went down and studied with Chris Powers at his Movement
Mm.
Performance Institute in LA. And that, I think seeing his model for his biomechanics lab and just the idea of a cash practice is probably what put it in my head. because I came back and actually the guy who ran the insurance-based clinic here in town that was my first job out of school, I convinced him, kind of become buddies, and I convinced him to come over and do the cash practice with me. So we were our own, independent providers, but basically we were in a gym. So it was a gym that had a downstairs area that was kind of a normal gym, and then upstairs they had Pilates and yoga and things. And we brought 2 tables in and just sort of paid them, if we saw a patient, we'd pay them 10%
Right.
or whatever of what we charged. So it was a great model. If I wasn't there, I didn't have to pay a lease, and I just paid
Yeah.
when I was there. And yeah, but I guess, yeah, we were early on probably in the cash practice model.
Very much so. And the other thing that I love that you did, and the same thing worked for me, quite frankly, is I was a faculty member at the University of New England for 15 years in their PT program. And that really allowed me to kind of build score builders as well during that time, because, you're working with students every day. These students have to pass a licensing exam. And I started to go on the road a little bit more and teach. And I had the flexibility to do that because, as you said, academia, I mean, it's a lot of work. It's a lot that goes into it, but there are pockets of time. Matter of fact, when I was at the University of New England, they provided you with one day a week that you could go do whatever you wanted. If you wanted to do research, if you wanted to practice, if you wanted to dedicate it to writing. So I like that it worked out very well for the score builders business. And I think same for you. You were able to keep, a toe in each area. And then that obviously paid off later. So when did the concept of rehab science then start to emerge?
Yeah, it's funny. I probably was early on in this. I started Instagram, a Rehab Science Instagram. Actually, back then it was called Rehab Scientist, and I
Okay.
started that in 2012 as well. And that was back when people were just posting like food pictures and things on Instagram. There wasn't there wasn't this idea of like being a content creator or having a
Sure.
business from that. And I actually I was teaching for another organization, and a physical therapist came to one of those courses, and he was on Instagram, and he said, "Hey, you should go on Instagram." And so that was actually, to his credit, what gave me the idea to get it going. The funny thing is I deleted that account twice because at the time, it was called Rehab Scientist. It was sort of narcissistic, I think, in a way. I didn't really understand what I should be doing. I think it got me to where I am now, right? You need those kind of evolutionary
Of
type
course.
steps where you kind of figure out what doesn't work and what does work. And at the time, I was posting things like just things of me doing box jumps in the gym, or, I wasn't putting out educational content. It was all movement related, but it wasn't really helping people. I think it had an element of that, but then sometimes it was just sort of me almost showing off or something. So I I would always kind of I would wake up one morning and be like, "Oh, why am I doing this? This is very narcissistic." I just delete the account. So what happened was I deleted it the second time in 2016, and I went into my biomechanics class at Westmont, and a student came up to me and he said, "Hey, you had posted a rotator cuff post, and it was really, the exercises were helping my mom, but I can't find it." And I had deleted the account. So I was like, "Oh, this is what I need to do, is just do this every day, address common problems." So I left biomechanics that day and went out and sat at the track at Westmont, and I restarted it, but I couldn't get Rehab Scientist because I had just deleted it. So I got Rehab Science, which was amazing because it's
It's
less
better.
focused on
Yeah.
me as the person. It's about
Yes.
the whole umbrella of what we study. And so it was really a blessing in disguise that Rehab Science was available, and that I couldn't get Rehab Scientist. But that's where it all started, like that December 2016. And I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to focus on, I'd been in PT for about 10 years at that
Mhm.
point, from 2007 to almost 2017. And I just thought, I'm just going to I've seen all these common patterns. I know these common questions and problems that people come with. I'm just going to address them every day and just try to stick to it and see what happens.
That's very ambitious. Yeah, no, I love it. But isn't it funny? Like, a lot of people, might assume that, you've got this big following, you're very well known, you're a published author, that, well, yeah, the path was very clear, and that, Tom had this strategic plan put together and he followed it. And, but, you're stumbling along the way, right? But to your point, it's all part of the process. You didn't wait to start something until you felt like you had all the answers or you had it figured out. But you're a seasoned educator, you're a seasoned PT, and then day by day you made the commitment. One of the other things you said earlier that I love is you said, I think you mentioned that your wife may verify for this, but that you tend to be a little bit obsessive, or I prefer to think of that as highly focused. Um, but I think that's honestly kind of a necessary attribute to do what you do, where you are producing content or educational material, certainly on a weekly basis and sometimes on a daily basis. So so now we're at the point where you're like, hey, someone's using this, people are liking it. You have a little more direction now, like you said, maybe not as much of a focus on you and performance, but on helping others get their patients better faster. So then the trajectory obviously at some point just takes off. So how do we go from that point where, you're deleting accounts, adding accounts, changing names? How do we start to pick up momentum and steam?
Yeah, I like what you said. Hyperfocus is such a better term because I really do think it's an attribute that has helped me. I can just become incredibly focused on one thing, and I have to be careful not to lose balance with other things because sometimes I will
Yes.
become almost too focused. But from that point, and exactly like you said, it was stumbling forward. I had no strategic plan. I was just doing this because I was passionate about it and wanted to put out content was helpful. And this was just a platform to do it. It wasn't, I cannot say I went into it and people know so much about social media, creating businesses from social media now. There's so much about it. There was nothing that I knew of back then.
Right. Very early.
Yeah, I was just putting stuff out. So I think I heard a quote one time that success is this combination of opportunity and experience when those two things come together. And I think exactly like you said, I was 10 years into being a PT, so I recognized common patterns, had some experience treating patients, knew what tended to help people. And then there was this opportunity to put things out there on social media. And I was, like you mentioned with Score Builders, I was lucky in that because I had pursued this teaching position, teaching was great that it opened up time and it gave me some flexibility. Teaching almost felt like the next thing below being an entrepreneur because you had some freedom with your time.
I like that.
And that was so important to me. It's always been my number one value. And so it allowed me to kind of pursue other things. But to your question, once I had that third account going in late 2016, almost 2017, then I just focused on everyday posting. And that's where the hyper focus came in. And I figured out my systems. And I think it's so much about systems to be able to be consistent on social media. And that took
Yes.
me a long time to develop. I go back and look at those early posts. They differ in a lot of ways to what I'm doing now. And in the early days, I was having to create lots of new content. Now I can kind of recycle things. There's so much stuff. And I've answered almost every question. I can kind of bring it back and change it slightly and kind of, so the system is easier now than it was in the early days. But I just tried to stay consistent, posting every day and answering questions that help people solve common problems. And it really grew fast. I think probably because I was really, at that time, probably one of the first 5 to 10 PTs on Instagram. I only knew a few other people posting content regularly. And so it really, it grew pretty fast. And, in those days, it was so amazing. You'd gain 10,000 people and just be, oh my, I can't remember. I was probably more excited about that than I am now if it goes up 100,000, So those early days were so exciting and you had so much engagement, it's changed a little bit over the years, but you had so many people. I spent so much time in the comment section answering questions and I'm naturally pretty introverted. So while I recognize the gold standard is seeing a patient in person and working with them and being able to touch them and move things, it is very draining to me. Whereas
Yes.
answering questions on social media wasn't that draining. I think because there's a little bit of a barrier there and you can step away from it when you need to. It really worked well for kind of my personality. And that really helped it grow too, is that I think people could see not only is this guy on here posting content, but he's also kind of responding to questions. And so that was a lot of what helped it grow back then and still today.
So tell us a little bit for those that aren't familiar with Rehab Science. Tell us tell us the scope of your offerings. What do you do? What do you offer? Why should physical therapists be interested, and patients for that matter, in your current offering?
Yeah, so essentially, Rehab Science is mostly a social media brand that's on Instagram and YouTube, and of course, I have my website and the book. But initially, it was really just social media platforms, and the offering. And initially, it was not a. I didn't think of this as a business, so it was really just an educational offering, trying to help people understand their bodies, understand common pain issues and injuries, and then really the educational side of like we would like if somebody goes into physical therapy, the physical therapist is going to educate you on the condition and help you develop a plan to navigate it going forward. And so I think I was doing that in sort of a digital landscape. The person wasn't obviously always talking to me, but it was really providing them some of the educational materials that I'd give to a real patient. And amazingly seeing it really help people navigate those issues without them actually coming in and seeing me for an evaluation and an appointment. So that was like that for years. I didn't think of this. I never thought of this being a business until probably 2 years in. It was probably, I started in the late 2016, probably around somewhere in the middle of late 2018, I started developing digital rehab programs so people could go pay a small amount and they could pick a program based on, oh, I've got sciatica, I've got tennis elbow, I've got Achilles tendinopathy. They could buy a program on my website and have kind of the exercises that I would typically prescribe. So that was really the first offering. And like a lot of things in business stumbling forward, it didn't do well. Like that offering never really sold. And you know, it may have been that I didn't spend a lot of time marketing it. And that's something that I've learned over the years, learned a lot about marketing and just being out there. But that offering didn't do well. So I really then had to iterate and come up with different things. And that's another thing that, right, was never really taught much about business. Now I consume all kinds of entrepreneurship and business content, but nobody had told me about this idea of kind of like failing fast, trying things. If they don't work, iterate and just keep trying. And so that was something I had to kind of slowly learn on this journey. But yeah, it wasn't really a business in the beginning. It was really just educational offerings, which I think worked to my benefit because I built trust with people and I wasn't asking for anything. And
That's
I
a great
think,
point.
I think so much of social media now, people just are in it for the outcome. They're just there to try and make money and build a business. And that's not the way you can't approach it like that. Not only will you not last, you'll burn out. This stuff's a marathon. You have to be in it with the right mission. You know, if you have the right mission, you will stay consistent and you'll stay with it for years. And then you can build trust and maybe launch a business out of it. But if you come into it with that mindset right away, just seen so many people fail. They don't last because they
Right.
just aren't, they're in it for the wrong reasons. And the audience will see through that. So even sometimes if I get a little too focused on, now that it is kind of a business, if I start thinking too much about the business and offers and things and thinking about, revenue or that, if I lose sight of that just a little, I think it affects the energy and the educational content that I put out. It brings down the quality. So I really have to remind myself, like, what is the mission of this? It really is just to help people first off. And if it only does that, I'm just there to help people, that's going to help build trust. And then when I do ask for something later on, people are going to be more likely to want to support it.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you had said because you're right. It's a very skeptical, people are very skeptical today, far more than they were a decade ago. And there's probably reason for that, right? I mean, there's some healthy level of skepticism. So you're not taken advantage of, that this person's legitimate. But yeah, it was a noble pursuit for a long time for you. And money wasn't part of it. You weren't charging for anything. And people found your information to be beneficial. So it's, I know it's tricky sometimes to build that way because, there are a lot of economic pressures on people, et cetera. But I think you're right. If you go in too hard, too quickly, without kind of the street cred in order to, support what you're doing, I think it can be very, very difficult. Now, how did tell us about, because this book is amazing, to be honest with you.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. So much detail. So what was the premise here? let me just preamble a couple things. I could see how you'd be extremely attractive as an author because you have such a massive following, right? And from a quality control standpoint, people have watched the quality of these videos. They know what a master clinician you are. But how was this something that you went out and sought a publisher? Was this that someone came to you and said, "Hey, Tom, we're a big fan of yours. We have a great idea. We'd like to collaborate"? Because I'm sure your following has opened up a lot of doors. So I'd kind of like to touch on that a little bit in terms of how that's been a part of your business growth.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The publisher, there are lots of opportunities that come around now, and that is another where it's taken me some time to kind of figure out what I say yes and no to, slowly kind of figuring that out. But this one was the publisher reaching out to me. And it was actually my co-author, Glenn Cordoza, whose name is on the front cover of the book. He actually emailed me, and that was February of 2021. So we were in COVID. And it was just perfect timing, because I wasn't seeing that many patients. I was still just doing the social media stuff every day, but and I was out of my teaching job. I left my teaching job in the spring of 2019. So that was
Okay.
kind of when I went full in on Rehab Science, was spring of 2019. And then, COVID hits, and luckily for me, I had been building that already. And so it was already someone people knew online. And so when seeing patients kind of went away, I still had that to focus on. And then, yeah, he reached out to me. The book world is a little tricky now because publishers are looking for people who already have an audience. They, like you said,
Yes.
it's built in, it makes sense for them. It's built in marketing already. There's no guarantee, but there's more of a guarantee that you're going to be able to sell copies of the book if they take you on. So they really have thresholds now where you have to have a certain following. At one point I heard it was 5,000 followers, but I'm sure it's probably higher than that now. But they want to make sure you have a following before they think about the idea of bringing you on. And that was what happened. My co-author Glenn emailed me, and just one of those emails that I would have almost thought was spam and would have deleted, but I'm glad I read it through. And yeah, that took me down the journey of the book, which was a 2-year process. We spent a big chunk of COVID writing the book, and the main motivation for me was that while social media is incredibly helpful for rehab content, you can't get into the same nuance. There's just always pieces left out. People would find a post on a particular topic, and there's a word limit in the description. You just can't, and a lot of times people wouldn't read the caption. And I'm just showing a few exercises. That's a lot of what my posts are, these carousel posts where I'll show the anatomy kind of like of a particular issue. Maybe it's Achilles problem. You see the Achilles and the Achilles tendon and talking about tendinopathy, and then they can swipe through to exercises.
Mhm.
And typically it's kind of a progression of exercises, but there's no real instruction. You just can't include all that. And so the book to me was a real opportunity to get into the science of pain and injury rehabilitation, which are the first 10 chapters of the book. There's about 500 research citations. So I really spent a lot of time going through the research, and I had a real deep interest in pain science. So I really wanted people to understand pain, understand injury. What are the differences between those? Because as we know, sometimes people have pain and don't have injury. Sometimes people have an injury and don't have pain. And so
Right.
just kind of teasing those apart. And then the back part of the book is basically programs with pictures of me doing the exercises, but broken down by body. Each body region has its own chapter. And the goal was to just really be able to provide more of the educational content, like if they actually came to see me in the clinic, and then really create programs that, they're still cookie cutter programs, right? Because I'm not evaluating the person
Sure.
and
Sure.
understanding their symptoms, exact symptoms and impairments. So it's not the same as, like I said before, I think the gold standard still is you go see a clinician, they give you the 2 or 3 exercises that really are the exact thing for where you're at in your healing process and your symptoms. But it is amazing what people can do when they have a book with the right educational content and a general progression. How many people I've talked to that have been able to navigate their own issues with just a resource like that.
Yeah, which is why I think it's so amazing because it's so broad. And I mean, what was your kind of strategy in terms of walking that line between making this, obviously it's heavily evidence based in terms of its influence, but yet this is not reading like a manuscript, in PT Journal, or it's not. I mean, you had to make this kind of accessible to the layperson, but you also, I would imagine, wanted this to be valuable for the practicing physical therapist who's just looking to, I need some additional ideas. I mean, because the fantastic illustrations, really nice, clean descriptions. And so I think there's value on both, but it's kind of hard sometimes playing it to two masters, meaning, the general public versus, versus a healthcare provider. So talk a little bit about that. Where'd you draw that line?
Yeah, and that was exactly what we went into it with. But it is a tricky line because my audience has always been that. It's a good mix of general population who are looking for help, and then all different types of fitness and rehab practitioners who want to figure out how to serve their clients and patients better. So we knew going into the book that we wanted to be able to serve both groups. And I think probably from my side, I think that's again where maybe some experience comes in just in learning how to communicate with patients. And I'd also spent years, I taught for Redcord, which was a Norwegian physiotherapy company. I taught for them for 6 years, taught just practitioners. So I came into the book with this kind of interesting, I think, background of teaching patients, teaching practitioners, and teaching kinesiology undergraduate students. So I think, uh, I think part of it is that to some degree, maybe I developed, I'm just guessing, but maybe kind of developed an educational kind of framework that um, has allowed me. I was thinking about this, beforehand, and I can't say for sure, but I think just probably those different areas of teaching have helped me in my both spoken and written communication to be able to kind of break some of the complex things down for patients, but also keep it enough technical that the practitioners still feel like they're getting, their educational needs met out of it. The other side of it is that Glenn, my co-author, he his whole career has been in fitness books, and so he is
Mm,
not a physio. He's not a
okay.
physical therapist. So he was amazing in that anything that I would write, he could also then read it through the lens of the regular
Oh,
person.
very valuable.
Yes, because I have a tendency to write probably a little more technical, like what the practitioners would want. So I have to remind myself, like if I'm using anatomical terms and things, the hamstrings are on the posterior thigh, like I will sometimes just write things like that. And I think most general public people don't seem to complain. I think they probably can figure things out more than we give them
Right,
credit
right.
for. But Glenn was amazing in that whatever I would write, he could tune it up to kind of just see it from a different perspective. I think, when you've been in something for so long, sometimes it's hard to fully grasp how someone who's not in your profession, um, how much they would perceive of it. So it was his input and editing there, and writing was. Uh, the book wouldn't have been anywhere near the product it is now without him.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much intentionality there was when you did that, but that worked out fantastic, right? I mean, that the two of you come at it from completely different sides and probably settle right in that sweet area. And I think there are a lot of physical therapists like me too that you know what? Sometimes it's nice when I'm not reading something real technical. You know what I mean? You still you're getting the key pieces. I mean, you can fill in the blanks through your clinical knowledge and decision making, et cetera. But a lot of times it's just for I could see something like this from me going to for just hey, I haven't treated that many patients with this condition. I need some ideas. I need a more advanced, progression on the exercise that I presently have them doing. Oh, that's kind of cool. I never thought about that. And then it's just there for you. So I think this is a tremendous resource, not just for PT students. Who obviously, I'm just picturing a student out on clinical experiences, right? You can't bring all your books, your detailed notes, et cetera. And when you think about the option of like randomly Googling or going down that hole, I mean, that efficiency is just not there. But I also think, again, for the practicing therapist, there's value or even maybe validation sometimes. Okay, yeah, I like where this is going. It makes sense. That's kind of what I was thinking. And Tom gave me these other ideas or just maybe confirm what I was thinking. Because you're right, the practicing clinician has the advantage in many cases of seeing the patient, right, directly, and they can fine tune. But, is this, I could even see in someone being like, I don't think from a differential diagnosis, situation, I'm not even sure this is really what I'm dealing with anymore. It's really presenting more like X, Y, or Z. So it's a thought exercise like most of these things. And it's just putting more things in your toolbox, which is why I liked it so much. Now, so as your business has kind of expanded, I mean, this is like a real, like, I'm not asking any financial information, obviously, but this is like a real legit, successful business. But I'm sure you've been able to, for a while, no doubt, you were chief cook, bottle washer, every active task, you had to figure out a way to do it and go through the process. And, you didn't have a business coach, et cetera. But as you've evolved, have you taken on, are there other people in the Rehab Science team? And this could be video people, this could be business coaches. Just tell us about your supporting cast.
Yeah, it actually has still stayed pretty much a solopreneur type
Wow.
situation, which I am always on the fence of changing that, but I do have a few. Now, my wife's a physical therapist, so she's basically my videographer,
Okay.
and she's a
Yeah.
consultant. And a lot of, like if I'm filming a YouTube video on a particular topic, I'll often ask her, is there something else you like to give patients for this, or is there a cue or something? So she's a huge asset, right? Like I would have to pay a videographer weekly to film content. And sometimes for the manual therapy videos, my kids actually film them. I have two daughters. They'll film the reels. So, I'm taking advantage. It's child labor at this point.
We did the same thing forever. My wife, sometimes when I'd have to ask my wife to be in like a little video or an image, she'd be like, she goes, I look terrible. There's no way you're putting that out. You know, how you get into those things. And then,
Totally.
with some of the kids, it'd be like, hey, Tommy and Nicole would like to come over if you've got any more, patient work, and we'd pay them a little bit. You know what I mean? But
Totally.
that's what you got to do.
Yep.
You got to bootstrap,
Yes.
right?
Yep. Yeah. So, I've been able to keep it mostly with that. It is starting to get to the point where sometimes my bandwidth is pretty maximized with running the podcast on my own. And I did have, actually, in the early phases when I was doing more in-person podcast episodes, I did have a podcast producer who'd come and help me. So that was another individual, but I've switched to doing kind of all virtual. So running the podcast on my own, all the social media, book marketing, it does sometimes feel like my brain is I still have a lot of freedom with time. So it's kind of it's this weird mix where I feel like I've got time, but also my brain feels very maximized. Like I think it's part of that hyper focus thing. I have a hard time. I just never stop. It's the entrepreneurship. You love what you're doing, and
Well,
you
that's
love
what I was going to
seeing it
say.
grow
You
and building
clearly
it.
love this process, and so
Yes.
when you still feel like you have time, it's because you're not complete. Like, yes, you're busy. You're extremely busy, but you're engaged in a labor of love, and you're not mentally exhausted because I'm sure this fuels you to large part. How does your wife feel about this? And I only ask because with any entrepreneur, that's a delicate, like I always joke with my wife, sometimes I'll come home and be like, hey, I have a really good idea I'd like to talk about it. And she'll be like, not tonight.
Yeah,
Like,
no, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, I have to restrain myself from talking to her because I'm a verbal processor and it drives her crazy. So
okay, fair.
anytime we'll take the dog for a walk, I just have to not, because I'll talk the whole hour about what I'm building and developing, and she can't take it. She's so sick of it. So, yeah, luckily I've got Glenn now with the book, so he and I verbal process together, and I have another buddy we chop things up with. So I try to restrain myself, and I've really been trying to be better about that because it does. I mean, she loves that I have freedom of time. The girls have an event at school or something. I can go to it. So obviously she sees that positive, but she does get sick of me sort of ruminating and talking about things all the time. So, and then when you ask, I actually for YouTube, I have a guy who makes my thumbnails who's in Ukraine. So I have a guy in Ukraine who makes my thumbnails. So that part it's cool to be able to collaborate and connect with other people. But he's pretty much the only contractor that I use. But like
and
I
was
said,
that through Upwork or Fiverr?
That was
or
through
something?
Fiverr. Yeah, through Fiverr. Yeah.
We've talked about that with some of the other guests, but it's a great, I mean, we have an animator we've worked with almost 10 years from Brazil. And, the cost, we're looking at $150 per hour animation costs around our area. And with the amount of animation we do, it's not even possible. We couldn't even consider doing that at the time. And even now, we won't, like, why would we want to? We have this fantastic relationship with this person. And so, so for people, again, there are options. There are a lot of options. And it sounds like you've had a similar trajectory to what we've done with using contractors.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so much, like, I harp on this all the time, but I think any of the physios, PTs listening to this, I just think there's so much value in creating a personal brand and social media. Like, if you want to, you're trapped in a work situation that's kind of burning you out and you don't have any control over your time, or maybe just want to make a little bit more. I just think there's so much value in taking that knowledge you have that can help people solve problems. Everyone around the world has a phone and is on social media. I mean, my largest geography on YouTube is India, right? Like a lot of times can't go see physios or it's too expensive.
Yeah, right.
But they can watch a YouTube video and get better. And I just think if you, there's so many opportunities. We were talking about this earlier. Like, there's so many opportunities that come from building a personal brand. Not only are you out there just helping people and having that as your foundation for why you do it, but as it grows, if you can be consistent with it, kind of do it on the side, find a system that works for you and a way of doing it that you enjoy, it really can grow. And I mean, I don't know about where you're at, but out here, it's like an 8 to 12 week wait for people to get in to see physios right now in insurance clinics. So I just think, you know, there are lots of people looking for solutions. And I
No
think
doubt.
sometimes people talk about it being saturated, but I think if you find kind of your niche area, maybe it's a specific region of the body, a specific condition. I've got a buddy on Instagram that only does hips. He's just the hip physio. And, there's people that only do neuro or, different specialties within PT. I just think there's so much potential upside to building personal brand. And maybe that helps you, like I say, build a little extra money. Maybe it builds enough to where you can get out of a job that's kind of slowly just burning you out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I don't think there's any question about it. It's tough, right? Because I mean, I think there's the mindset when you talk to people, especially with social media pieces, that some people just feel like, and maybe it's just the exhaustion of PT school, but feel like, all the good ideas have been taken. Everyone has a podcast. Everyone's trying to be an influencer. I mean, what would you say to those people who maybe just feel like, because I would argue at any point in history, people have felt some of those same things. And maybe it wasn't
Mhm.
social media, but maybe it was, oh, there are so many other educational resources out there. There's so many other good print materials. There's just too big a barrier to entry, right?
Mhm.
And obviously, I think one of the wonderful things social media has done is the barrier to entry. It's not like you have to, like your book. If you had to write this book and you had 10,000 units printed or something reasonable to get a legitimate unit cost. I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars, like, without question. And so again, there are not the barriers to entry, but it's a competitive marketplace. So what would you say if I said, look, appreciate it, Tom. You've done fantastic. You were in early. I wasn't. I don't have the opportunities you have.
Yeah, I
Bring
would
me back from the
say,
ledge.
yeah, totally. I think exactly what you said. The barriers to entry are so low. You literally, if you just I record everything with my iPhone. Everything's with my iPhone.
Wow.
After a while, I got a wireless mic. I have a Rode wireless mic I got on Amazon. Like, you do not need much, and you could just start with your phone. And I just think that people have to remember that it's not just the information you're putting it out, because all these platforms are mostly video based. You have to remember it is your essence as a person. That is your personal brand. That's what differentiates you from
That's
everyone
great.
else. So yeah, you might be talking about you could literally, if you're somebody who can learn to can communicate, like if you've been working with patients for years, you probably have some decent skill in communication. So if you can communicate and get over the fear of like being on camera, and that only takes a little while. Like, you get used to hearing your own voice and it doesn't annoy you anymore, and you just get used to seeing yourself on camera and talking to the camera. You adapt to it. It just takes a little bit of practice. If you can get over the fear of like putting things out and people seeing it, it even if you're covering the same information, if you can just take those communication skills that you've got in the clinic, your essence as a person is what differentiates you from everyone else. You could cover the same material and I guarantee still grow a YouTube or Instagram. Right now, I see people doing it all the time. I see new physical therapists, new chiropractors starting social media accounts and blowing up because they spend a little bit of time, you know, thinking about what they're going to record. In the beginning, it's probably just thinking a little bit about what am I going to say in this video. Just a little bit of research on like what makes a good video. There's so much content out there on that right now. Like, what makes a good video?
Oh, there is. Oh, yeah.
I edit all my videos with an app on my phone. So it's not that complicated. If you just spend a little bit of time, just try to get 1 or 2% better each day. Like, just try to put in a little bit, even if it's just a side thing that you've got a full-time job, you can easily do this on the side, put things out there. And I think even though there's tons of information on everything, it really is you as a person that differentiates you from other people. Because even what I'm putting out, I mean, look, there are people that are growing like crazy and we're covering the same information, but what differentiates me is me. Like, I am different from those people. I have a certain look about me, a certain way of communicating, a certain energy. Like, that stuff is what differentiates Rehab Science at this point in a lot of ways from all the other people who are covering the same topic.
Yeah, and you put yourself out there, right? I mean, you've given your audience the opportunity to sample you, your personality, your demeanor, your offering, your education, and I'm sure your number of repeat, users is incredibly high. I'm sure you're a favorite on many people's, browsers, and you've earned that over time. But again, when you started, there wasn't a clear trajectory, there wasn't a clear path, but you bought a ticket to the game, maybe in the top row of the bleachers, and then look what's happening. Now you've got this beautiful box down low, and you're looking at. I mean, you've paid your dues, and you've gone through this process, and you're still not satisfied. Why? Because you love it.
Mhm.
So yeah. So I guess I like to always tell students. I think you articulate this really well. It's like, get into the game. Like,
Mhm.
start something. Like you said, the 1% to 2% better every day, every week, whatever it may be, meaningful changes. And then opportunities just present themselves like the book did to you, right? And like 10 other things like that have happened in your career as well. And you were open to it. You were obviously very good at making decisions and weighing different offers. I'm sure you do that all the time now with brands, and other individuals who approach you. But again, you didn't have all the answers initially. You still don't have all the answers. But boy, your trajectory has been absolutely fantastic, and I'm super happy you took the time and were willing to you talk to us. But I get excited about. I know what being an entrepreneur has meant to my happiness, my family, and in all of these things. And I just think it's so important for students to, yes, you're going to be a physical therapist. That's fantastic. But there are other opportunities out there that may fulfill you, they may complete you, and they just make you a better therapist regardless. So let's consider starting. And I think people like you are very inspirational for people to hear their story, or your story in this case, and maybe dream about their own future. So
Well,
thanks so
thanks,
much
Scott.
for joining us.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me on. I couldn't agree with you more. Every time I go back now, once or twice a semester, I go talk to the kinesiology students, and I talk about the same thing because most of them are looking at going to physical therapy school, and I just try to put it in their minds that, like, look, I've gone on this journey, and if you want to go into whatever healthcare field you go into, if you are willing to kind of take some risk and be creative, you can create that thing. Nowadays, just like we talked about, the barrier to entry is so low. You can take this information and knowledge that you're gaining and figure out ways to share it with the world and create a business out of that. And I think sometimes people are scared to take the risk, but it doesn't have to be something you just jump into and leave. You can do this stuff on the side, and it doesn't have to be a really complicated, there's so much editing and I've got to have the right equipment. No, you don't really need all that stuff. I mean, you really can just get going. You just gotta, there's a YouTube account that I love that always says, just hit record. Like, just hit record. Think about something like, what do I want to cover today? Like, think about a patient. A patient came in and asked you about something. You're like, oh, a lot of people have asked me about that. I should just talk about that for a second. Like, just start putting stuff out there, and you will slowly evolve. Just like we talked about, I came into this with no strategy, no business sense. I was literally just taking what patients had mentioned to me. And then I took my phone and I recorded me doing exercises in the gym and I put it up. I learned how to cut things into a square. That's all I knew.
That's pretty high tech.
Yeah.
But you're an idea guy, and above all, you are a grinder, and you're committed to your craft. And look what it's resulted in. So
Yeah.
continued success. I'd really encourage people to go get the Rehab Science book. I found it to be very, very helpful. I've spent a fair amount of time with it, actually. This is a legit recommendation here. But Tom, continued success, and we'll look forward to seeing what the next item in your journey is.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, man.
You're welcome.
And there you have it, another dose of PT-preneurial inspiration to fuel your journey. Check out more inspiring stories from PTs and PTAs out there making waves by listening and subscribing to our podcasts on your favorite streaming platforms. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast. Thanks for listening.